If you've been following the wild legal ride between Epic Games and Apple, you'll know that it has been almost 5 years since Fortnite was booted dramatically off the Apple App Store. And now, guess what? Fortnite is finally back. But why did it take so long, and what actually happened in the court case between Epic Games and Apple? In this video, we're going to talk about what the whole lawsuit was about, what the court decided, and what exactly all of this means for consumers. It's a big, big deal, whether you play Fortnite or not. Let's get into it. Okay, so to give a good explanation of what's going on here, we first need to start by giving a little bit of background about Fortnite, Epic Games, and Apple and the Apple App Store for the viewers who are not familiar. To begin, Fortnite is a game developed and published by Epic Games. It debuted in 2017 and has since become massive, with players enjoying the game on PC, console, and on mobile devices. It's best known for its Battle Royale mode, where as many as 100 players essentially get dropped onto an island and compete to be the very last person or team standing. It's fast-paced, it's colorful, and it has a unique building mechanic that sets it apart from other games. Also, they'll sometimes have events like concerts in the game, which oddly enough has also been the subject of other recent litigation over alleged patent violations, but that's a whole other can of worms. Now, one thing that's important about Fortnite to understand all of this litigation is that in the game, you can purchase something called V-Bucks. V-Bucks are a virtual currency used in Fortnite. Players can earn them by progressing in the game, but it seems most people buy V-Bucks with real money and then use them to buy things in the game. These will be things like cosmetic items, like character skins to change what your avatar looks like, as well as emotes and the appearance of weapons that your avatar will use. There are also other virtual goods apparently that you can get in what's called the Fortnite item shop. Now remember that Epic Games offers Fortnite on all of these different formats, on PC, on gaming consoles, and on mobile devices, so phones and tablets. Well, players who were playing on mobile devices had to download the Fortnite app to play there. And mobile users who used an Apple device, so iPhones and iPads, in order to play the game, had to use the Apple App Store in order to download it. And now Apple has long had a policy of charging companies that offer apps on the Apple App Store a 30% charge for every in-app purchase. This means if you download an app for free and within the app there's an offer to buy something, whatever it is that you are paying for that item, Apple gets 30% of that. And so Fortnite, which offers these V-Bucks, had to use the Apple App Store's in-app purchase feature for every gamer that was using the mobile app on an Apple device. That meant that Epic Games was having to give up 30% of everything it was making when the user was buying V-Bucks through these devices. But if that same user was instead playing on a PC or a gaming console, Epic Games was able to keep not just 70% of the V-Bucks purchase, but 100%. So as a business, this is obviously a massive, massive problem, especially if a significant portion of your user base are using mobile apps. Or if you start to see trends showing that the mobile user base is likely to grow in the future over PC and console users. So in that kind of a situation, you would think that there would be a fairly simple solution. Just allow users to buy V-Bucks elsewhere and then just use them in the app. But the problem is Apple had certain rules for all apps that they allowed into the Apple App Store, and that would go against one of their rules. So in August 2020, Epic Games made a bold move. They knowingly breached their contract with Apple. Specifically, Epic Games tried to sneak a direct payment system into Fortnite. This payment system let players buy V-Bucks without going through Apple's system, and crucially, without paying Apple's 30% cut. But very quickly, Apple realized this and showed that they were not having it. They yanked Fortnite from the Apple App Store, and in response, Epic immediately sued, claiming Apple was running an illegal monopoly in violation of American antitrust laws. And Epic Games also immediately ran the only litigation promo that I have ever seen in my entire life.
We shall prevail.
This was clearly very calculated, since it basically is a satire of Apple's famous 1984 commercial announcing Apple's introduction to intentionally disrupt the computer industry with the brand new Macintosh computer.
On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh. And you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984.
But anyway, so began the dramatic saga of Epic Games v. Apple. Now, in their complaint and other filings, Epic Games made a bunch of arguments, but these were the main heart of their claims. First, they said that in order to be allowed to offer an app in Apple's App Store, a developer is required to enter into a non-negotiable contract with Apple. And as a result, Apple's App Store is the only way to get apps onto iPhones and iPads. And relatedly, they said that Apple forces developers to use its in-app purchase payment system, taking a hefty 30% commission. And while some developers have decided to pass that 30% fee to consumers, some small businesses can't afford to inflate their prices to absorb that fee, or else they will lose their customers. This is, of course, according to Epic Games. And so they said Apple is an illegal monopoly and at the very least is engaging in anti-competitive behavior that hurts both developers and consumers by limiting choices and synthetically keeping prices high. Ultimately, Epic Games wanted the court to do two main things. The first was to force Apple to open up iOS to competing app stores and payment systems so the companies that offer apps aren't forced to use Apple's in-app purchase feature. And the second was to force Apple to allow Fortnite back on the Apple App Store. Now, of course, Apple is a massive tech giant, and they were not about to go down without a very heavy fight. And so in their defense, Apple shot back at Epic Games. They said Epic Games breached its contract by intentionally sneaking in that payment system. They also said that those rules that govern what app developers can do with apps that they allow on the Apple App Store aren't for nothing. They're intended to protect security, privacy, and the user experience. And most of all, Apple argued that they were not an illegal monopoly, just a business with a very popular product. And they pointed out that the US Supreme Court has said that courts are not in the business of punishing a company for having too big a market share if they didn't do anything improper to get it. For example, if a business is the first to the market with a new product that immediately goes bananas with consumers, a company can technically become a monopoly just by being successful. It doesn't become illegal until they're doing something like manipulating the market to prevent the existence of competitors. And so basically what Apple said here was this.
I'm sorry that people are so jealous of me, but I can't help it that I'm popular.
Oh my God. Okay, but now here's where things get interesting. In September 2021, Judge Yvonne Gonzalez-Rogers, the judge presiding over this case, issued her big decision over this issue. And in her order, she found that Epic Games didn't prove Apple had enough market power to be an illegal monopolist in the relevant market. But and this is huge, she also said that that doesn't mean Apple gets to win here. Specifically, she said that Apple's anti-steering rules, the ones that ban developers from telling users about other ways to pay, are unfair and violate California's unfair competition law. This prevents developers from communicating to the consumer that there is a lower price on another platform, or from telling them that the 30% commission from Apple actually exists. This inorganically results in higher prices and fewer options for the consumer. And so, because this harms consumers, the judge issued a permanent injunction ordering Apple to let developers steer users to alternative payment options outside the App Store. So in other words, developers can now tell you things like, hey, you can buy V-Bucks cheaper on our website. Go there if you want a discount. And so in the end, Apple didn't have to allow the existence of other app stores on iPhones and iPads, but it did have to loosen up its payment rules. So now, why did the judge rule this way on this issue? For one thing, she said that you don't have to be an illegal monopoly to run afoul of California's anti-competitive laws. Apple's rules were unfair enough on their own. She also said that Apple's anti-steering rules illegally stifle consumer choice and hide critical information from consumers, even if Apple isn't technically a monopoly. And at the end of the day, harms to consumers, not to businesses or their competitors, is ultimately what antitrust laws are all about. Okay, so now you might be asking, if the judge ordered all of this in 2021, why is Fortnite only coming back now? So after this 2021 ruling by the judge, here's what happened. Apple and Epic both appealed parts of the decision, which dragged out the final conclusions in the case. And then on top of that, Apple also made changes to its App Store, but Epic said that Apple was dragging its feet and not really following the court's order because they weren't allowing Fortnite back on the App Store. So on May 16th, 2025, Epic Games filed a motion to enforce the injunction. And in it, they said Apple was still blocking Fortnite's return and not letting Epic Games use fair links for alternative payments, all in violation of the court's 2021 order. And so, before Apple filed anything in response to Epic Games' motion, on May 19th, 2025, the judge issued an order to show cause on the subject. Now, if you're not familiar, an order to show cause, or an OSC for short, is never really something that you want to see if you are the subject of the OSC. When one of these is filed, it usually means that someone is in big trouble with the judge, because the judge is basically saying that you need to show cause for why some result should or shouldn't happen. In other words, it's basically the judge saying, explain to me why I shouldn't lay down the hammer on you for XYZ behavior. And here, the OSC was no different. In fact, it was very, very spicy. Here, the judge said, briefing shall occur on the schedule listed below and shall include the legal authority upon which Apple contends that it can ignore this court's order, having not received a stay from the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeal, even though its request was filed 12 days ago on May 7th, 2025. Obviously, Apple is fully capable of resolving this issue without further briefing or a hearing. However, if the parties do not file a joint notice that this issue is resolved and this court's intervention is required, the Apple official who is personally responsible for ensuring compliance shall personally appear at the hearing hereby set for Tuesday, May 27th, 2025 at 9 a.m. In other words, whoever is responsible over at Apple for ensuring that Apple complies with the court's 2021 order about in-app purchase and about allowing apps into the App Store for this particular purpose is going to be dragged into court in order to get personally raked over the coals by this judge. I can tell you, if I'm a lawyer on Apple's legal team, I am terrified of that. So understandably, Apple did not want to go through any of that. Facing the judge's threat of contempt and more legal headaches, Apple finally agreed to let Fortnite back on the App Store and to comply with the court's order on alternative payments. So, what does this all mean for you as a general consumer? For one thing, if you're a Fortnite user, the game is back on iOS. But aside from Fortnite, you might see more games and other apps offering cheaper payment options outside of Apple's system. In other words, things might become more affordable for your everyday consumer, even way outside the scope of this game. And that's because although Apple still has control over the Apple App Store, developers now have a bit more freedom to tell you about other ways to pay for these various items and for these various services that you can use through the app. And if Apple tries to budge outside of these rules, it seems that the judge is going to be very, very fast to enforce it. Now, in my opinion, this case is a very, very big deal, not just for Fortnite fans, but for anyone who uses an iPhone and probably actually even people outside of Apple's ecosystem. It shows that big companies don't have to be liable for something like monopolization under antitrust laws in order to hold them accountable for anti-competitive behavior. And importantly, even tech giants with massively, massively deep pockets and a huge roster of big-time lawyers can also be forced to play by the rules, or else courts can also step in to protect competition and consumer choice. But those are my thoughts. What do you think? Was Apple being unfair, or was Epic Games just trying to get out of paying its fair share? Let us know in the comments down below. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this, or at least found it interesting or informative. And if you did, I would love it if you would hit the like button. It does help us with the YouTube algorithm gods. And if you're new here and you want to see more coverage of crazy cases and interesting legal topics, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you can find out when the next video is uploaded. And if you're really enjoying the content and you want to know how to best support the channel and get perks like early access to videos like this one, consider becoming a member of Byte Club. You can join either through YouTube memberships or by becoming a supporter on Patreon. Links to both are in the description below. Otherwise, see you in the next one.